Wade Greer grabbed a 62-year-old man by the back of his flannel shirt and dragged him off the counter stool. Saturday morning, packed diner. Every fork stopped. Derek Colt caught the edge of the counter, looked Wade dead in the eye. "I've been sitting on this stool longer than you've been shaving, son." Wade shoved his face closer. "You talk back to me? My daddy's the chief of police. I say men like you eat outside." He grabbed Derek's collar with both hands and dragged him across the tile floor. Chairs screamed. Plates crashed. 12 people watched. Not one opened their mouths. Wade threw him onto the sidewalk and laughed. What he didn't know, what made him the most dangerous kind of fool, the kind who doesn't know what he's done until it's already too late, was exactly who he just put his hands on. To understand what happened next, you need to know who Derek Colt really was. Because nobody in that diner had a clue. This is Heart Tales. Here's the full story. The bell above the door jingled behind them, cheerful, completely wrong for the moment. Derek Colt sat on the sidewalk of the town where he was born. His right knee had cracked against the concrete. His palms were raw and pink. The flannel shirt his wife Carol had given him for his birthday last spring was torn at the shoulder seam. He didn't yell, didn't pound the ground, didn't call for help. He took a breath, then another. He pressed his hands flat against the concrete and pushed himself up, slowly. The way a man gets up when he wants you to know he's choosing to rise. Not because you told him to. Norma Watkins came running out the front door, the bell jingling behind her. She had a dish towel in one hand and fury in her eyes. Derek, are you okay?" "I'm fine, Norma." "You are not fine. That boy just—" "Norma," he put his hand on her arm. Gentle, steady. "I'm fine." She looked at him, eyes wet. Not from sadness, from the kind of anger that has nowhere left to go. 20 years she'd built that diner. Every table, every recipe, every morning before sunrise. And this kid was standing in the middle of it like he owned the air. Derek straightened his torn shirt and stood there on the sidewalk bleeding. The same posture he'd carried through 3 decades he never talked about. Inside, Wade Greer sat down at the counter, on Derek's stool. He picked up what was left of Derek's coffee and took a long sip. "Norma, how about some fresh bacon over here?" Norma didn't answer. She stood at the register with her arms crossed and her eyes on the parking lot. Derek walked to his truck. It was parked at the far end of the lot. A dark blue Ford F-250, 11 years old. Clean but not flashy. The kind of truck a man drives when he doesn't need anyone to notice him. He opened the driver's side door. His hands were still raw from the concrete. He reached into the glove compartment for a napkin and pressed it against the scrape on his right knee. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He was removing himself from a situation the way a man with 31 years of training knew how to do. De-escalate. Withdraw. Don't give them what they want. But Wade wasn't done. The diner door swung open. The brass bell jingled. Wade walked out with Deputy Lou Satch 2 steps behind him, sunglasses on, thumbs hooked in his belt loops, walking slow. The way a man walks when he thinks the whole world is his sidewalk. "Hey, where do you think you're going?" Derek didn't turn around. He folded the napkin and placed it in his pocket. "I'm leaving. That's what you wanted." "I didn't say you could leave yet. I said you could leave the diner." Derek turned around, looked at Wade, then at Lou. Lou's hand was resting on his belt, not on his weapon, but close enough to send a message. Lou was 26. Buzz cut, thick neck, the kind of deputy who laughed at whatever the loudest voice in the room said. "What do you want, Wade?" "I want to know who you are. Show me some ID." "You're off duty. You have no authority to ask me for identification." Wade smiled, the same smile from inside the diner, the one that came right before the threat. "I'm off duty. Lou's not." He jerked his thumb toward the deputy. "Lou, ask the man for his ID." Lou stepped forward, cleared his throat. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification." Derek looked at Lou for a long moment. He could have argued. He knew his rights better than either of these men ever would. But he also knew what happened in small-town parking lots when a man decided to argue with a badge. He reached into his back pocket, slow, deliberate. making sure both hands were visible at all times. He pulled out his wallet and handed over his Kentucky driver's license. Lou walked back to his cruiser and ran it through the system. Derek stood by his truck with his arms at his sides. The morning sun was getting warmer. A bead of sweat rolled down the back of his neck. 2 minutes later, Lou walked back. He's clean. No warrants. Nothing. Wade's jaw flexed. He didn't like clean. Clean meant he had nothing to hold on to. Clean meant this man was exactly what he appeared to be. A 62-year-old who'd been minding his own business and drinking his own coffee. But Wade Greer didn't operate on facts. He started walking a slow circle around Derek's truck, running one hand along the side panel like he was inspecting something he already owned. Something doesn't feel right to me, Lou. I think I smell something, coming from this vehicle. Derek's voice was flat and steady. There is nothing in this truck. Well, I guess we'll find out. Lou, open it up. Lou hesitated. Just for a second, something crossed his face. A flicker of something that might have been conscience, or might have just been nerves. Then it was gone. He opened the passenger door without consent, without a warrant, without probable cause. Derek spoke clearly, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. I do not consent to this search. I am stating for the record that I do not consent. Noted, Wade said. He wasn't even looking at Derek. He was already going through the glove compartment. Registration papers, a pack of tissues, a small flashlight. He tossed each item onto the passenger seat. Lou searched the back seat. Floor mats, an old jacket, a pair of reading glasses in a case. Nothing. Then Wade found it. Under the back seat, pushed against the frame, a locked metal case, dark brown, about the size of a shoebox, heavy. Well, he pulled it out and set it on the hood. What do we have here? For the first time that morning, something shifted in Derek's eyes. Not fear, something older than fear, something protective. That is my personal property. It is locked. You have no right to open it. Lou, find me something. Wade, I don't think we should. Did I stutter? Lou pulled a flathead screwdriver from his cruiser's toolkit and handed it over without looking at Derek. Wade jammed it into the latch and twisted. The lock gave with a snap. He flipped the case open. Inside, laid on a bed of dark green velvet, were 4 items. A faded military photograph. A young man in dress uniform, standing straight, eyes forward. A folded American flag in a triangular frame. A leather journal with worn edges. And a small velvet box. Wade picked up the velvet box and opened it. Inside sat a bronze star medal, the ribbon slightly faded, the medal still catching the morning light. He held it up between 2 fingers, like it was something he'd found in a junk drawer. The hell is this? What? You buy this at a yard sale? Pick it up somewhere cheap? Derek said nothing, but his hands, those steady, calloused hands, closed into fists at his sides. Wade tossed the medal, just tossed it. It hit the asphalt, bounced once and rolled under the truck. Junk. He dropped the case on the ground. The photograph slid out onto the pavement. The journal's pages caught the morning breeze and fluttered open. Lou, I'm not finding anything illegal, but this man had an attitude problem in there. I think we need to hold him here until we figure out what's going on. Lou pulled out his handcuffs and looked at Derek. Sir, I'm going to need you to sit down on the curb. On what charge? Obstruction. Obstruction of what? No answer. Because there was no answer. There was no crime. No charge. Nothing. Except 2 men with a badge and a last name, and 1 man who'd refused to be afraid. Derek sat down on the curb. A 62-year-old man, a veteran, sitting on a concrete curb in the town where he was born, his knee bleeding through his khakis, his palms raw, his bronze star somewhere under his truck in the dirt. Wade pulled out his phone, threw his arm around Lou's shoulder, held the camera out. Click. A selfie. Both of them grinning. Derek on the curb behind them like he was part of the scenery. Wade looked at the photo and laughed. He didn't notice Norma standing in the back hallway of the diner, phone pressed flat against her ear, voice barely above a whisper. Ray, it's Norma. You need to come. They've got Derek in the parking lot. A pause. It's bad, Ray. It's real bad. To understand what happened in that parking lot, You have to understand Clayfield, Kentucky. Population just under 16,000. The kind of town where the same families have owned the same land for 4 generations, and everybody knows which families those are. Main Street ran 6 blocks, a hardware store that smelled like linseed oil and sawdust, a post office where the clerk knew your vehicle before she knew your face, a barber shop with a red and white pole that had been spinning since 1951. The county courthouse sat at the north end of the street, brick and mortar, American flag out front, the same flag that had been flying in the same spot for as long as anyone could remember. At the center of Main Street, between the barber shop and a pharmacy that still had a soda fountain in the back, sat Norma's Corner Kitchen. Norma Watkins had built that place from scratch 20 years ago. She was a woman in her mid-50s with flour on her apron by 6 in the morning and the kind of voice that could settle a room without rising above a normal speaking volume. Checkered curtains on the windows, a brass bell above the door, the smell of bacon grease and biscuits that reached you before you even touched the handle. Regulars had their own seats, their own mugs, their own unspoken arrangements. Norma had poured coffee into the same ceramic mugs for the same people every Saturday morning for 2 decades. She knew who took sugar and who didn't. She knew who needed a minute before you spoke to them. She ran that diner the way certain people run certain things, with the quiet certainty of someone who has figured out exactly what they're doing and why it matters. And nobody had been coming to Norma's longer than Derek Colt. Every Saturday, 8 in the morning. He hung his jacket on the second hook by the door. His hook. Everybody in that diner knew it without being told. Norma had his coffee poured before he reached the stool. Black, no sugar. The same ceramic mug with a small chip on the rim that she had refused to replace for 3 years. "Morning, Derek." "Morning, Norma." That was it. That was all either of them needed. Derek Colt was 62 years old. Tall, lean. The kind of lean that doesn't come from watching what you eat, but from 31 years of a life that didn't allow softness. There was a scar along his left forearm, faded now, pale against the skin. His hands were calloused and steady. Every time the front door of that diner opened, his eyes moved to it. A quick scan, half a second, then back to the newspaper. He sat with his spine straight. Not stiff, just straight, like his body had never entirely forgotten certain things. He wore no patches, no pins, no hat with a club logo on it, nothing that announced anything about who he was or where he'd been. To anyone walking into Norma's on a Saturday morning, he was just a man eating breakfast and reading the news. That was exactly how Derek preferred it. He'd come back to Clayfield 11 years ago, after his wife Carol asked him to. She was from here, grew up 4 miles east on Route 17, went to Harlan County High, still had a sister in town. When Derek retired from the Army, she said she wanted to come home. He said okay. He always said okay when Carol asked. They had a house on Whitfield Road, a 1/4 mile past the old grain elevator, 2 acres, a vegetable garden that Carol managed and Derek pretended to help with, a detached garage where he kept the motorcycle and the tools and the quiet. He was a man who needed quiet, the way other men needed conversation. He had learned the value of silence in places where the absence of it meant something had gone wrong. Now, on the other side of Clayfield, there was a name that carried its own kind of weight. Greer. Chief Donald Greer had run the Clayfield Police Department for 16 years. He was the kind of man who shook hands at the church potluck and buried paperwork on Monday. He had built a reputation on what looked like order, low crime numbers, a department that moved fast when the right people called, a face that television cameras seemed to like. 16 years of that face on the local news. 16 years of handshakes. His son Wade was 28, technically employed as a deputy in the next county over, but in Clayfield he moved like his father's badge was pinned to his own chest. Loud where his father was careful, obvious where his father was strategic. The kind of young man who had learned early that a powerful last name was a ceiling with no limit, and had spent every year since finding new ways to test that ceiling. People in Clayfield talked about Wade Greer the way people talk about weather they've learned to read. You didn't argue with it. You stepped out of its path and waited for it to pass. And when it passed, you went back inside and didn't say anything about it, because saying something about it wouldn't change anything and might make the next storm worse. Black residents knew him best. Wade had a habit of appearing where he wasn't needed. Traffic stops that stretched to 40 minutes with no ticket issued at the end. Noise complaints filed against houses that sat in complete silence. Always the same streets. Always the same faces. And nothing ever came of it. Because every piece of paper with Wade's name on it eventually made its way to his father's desk, and Donald Greer had a particular talent for paper. That was the world Derek Colt came home to every Saturday morning, and for 11 years, nothing had broken the rhythm of it. Until the morning it did. The number had been given to Norma on a Tuesday afternoon in March, 3 years after Derek first walked through her door. It wasn't raining that day. She remembered that specifically, because she'd expected it to. The sky had been the color of old pewter since morning, threatening all day, never delivering. By 3 in the afternoon, the last table had cleared out, and she was refilling the sugar caddies and listening to the weather radio on the shelf above the pass-through. Derek had stayed after the lunch rush. He did that occasionally, not often, but enough that Norma had stopped being surprised by it. He'd order a second cup of coffee and sit at the counter reading, or not reading, with the newspaper open in front of him, the way some men keep a television on, not for the sound but for the company. He was comfortable with his own silence. Most people aren't. That afternoon he set the paper down and watched her work for a moment. "You ever have trouble in here?" he asked. "With people." She kept counting sugar packets. Define trouble. The kind that walks through the door in a uniform and decides it's the kind of place that needs looking at. Norma was quiet for a moment. She set the caddy down. "Once or twice," she said. "Nothing I couldn't handle." "What'd you do?" Smiled, kept my mouth closed, waited for it to pass. Derek nodded slowly. He turned his coffee mug a quarter turn on the counter, the way he did when he was thinking about something from more than one direction. "That works," he said, "until it doesn't." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out a small card, plain white. No logo, no title, no department letterhead. Just a 10-digit number written in blue ink, neat and level. The handwriting of a man who'd spent years filling out forms that couldn't have errors. He set it on the counter in front of her. "That's a direct line," he said. "You call it, it picks up. Doesn't matter what time." Norma looked at the card, then at Derek. "Who picks up?" "Someone who'll come." "Come from where?" "Fort Campbell. About an hour and 40 minutes if the roads are clear." She picked up the card and turned it over. The back was blank. "You want to tell me whose number this is?" "Raymond Stokes. He's a general. 4 stars. Derek lifted his cup and took a sip. "We served together. 2 tours. He's the kind of man who picks up when I call, and the kind of man who doesn't ask a lot of questions before he moves." Norma looked at the number again. The ink was dark and certain on the white card. "Derek, why are you giving me this?" He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the first drops of rain finally hit the window. Just a few, scattered, like the sky had been waiting for permission. "Because I come in here every Saturday," he said. "And because I know what men like Wade Greer look like when they're deciding something. And because there may come a morning when I can't make the call myself, and I need someone in this room who can." That was all he said. He didn't explain further. He didn't tell her about the 3 deployments, or the year he'd spent in a hospital in Germany after the second one, or the thing that had happened in a village outside Kandahar that had earned him a medal he kept in a box he rarely opened. He didn't tell her that he and Raymond Stokes had carried each other through things that had no names in civilian language. He didn't say any of that. He didn't need to. Some things communicate themselves through the way a man holds a coffee mug in the quiet of an empty diner. Norma tucked the card into the front pocket of her apron. "I'll keep it," she said. "I know you will." She had kept it for 3 years. She'd moved it from apron to apron, worn pocket to worn pocket, the way some people carry a photograph or a folded note, not because they look at it, but because they need to know it's there. The card itself had grown soft at the corners from the washing and the handling. The ink had faded just slightly, but the numbers were still clear. She had memorized them 2 weeks after Derek gave the card to her. She told herself it was just practical, a good habit, the kind of thing a sensible person did. She didn't think she'd ever need to use it. She was still thinking that on the Saturday morning, when Wade Greer walked through her door, and she watched Derek Colt get dragged across her tile floor and thrown onto the sidewalk outside. And then she was in the back hallway with the phone in her hand. 10 digits she'd been carrying for 3 years. She pressed each one with the steadiness of a woman who had decided, precisely and without hesitation, that this was the morning she was going to use them. Derek left the house on Whitfield Road at 7:43 that Saturday morning. Carol was still in the kitchen when he came downstairs. She had coffee going and the back door open, letting in the early air. She handed him a mug without being asked. He drank half of it standing at the counter, watching the vegetable garden through the screen door. The tomatoes needed staking. He'd been meaning to get to that for 2 weeks. "You taking the truck?" she asked. "Yeah." "Be back for lunch?" "Should be." She nodded and went back to whatever she was doing at the sink. That was the whole conversation. 11 years of Saturday mornings had compressed most of them down to that. A handful of words, comfortable as worn leather, everything essential said, and nothing extra wasted. He didn't wear the vest that morning. That was the detail that mattered, though nobody would understand why until later. The vest was in the garage, hanging on the third hook beside the workbench where he kept it on weekdays when he wasn't riding. It was a dark leather cut, the back panel carrying the Iron Cross chapter patch, a design he'd helped choose 12 years ago, after he'd joined the Harlan County chapter of the Hells Angels. The patch identified him. In certain rooms, in certain towns, it changed the way people stood when he walked in. He didn't put it on that morning. It was warm out. He was going to Norma's, 2 miles from the house. He didn't need the vest to drink coffee and read the paper. He pulled on the flannel shirt Carol had given him for his birthday, dark green, soft from washing. He grabbed his jacket off the hook by the door, picked up his truck keys from the bowl on the entry table, and drove to Main Street. The lot outside Norma's was half full when he arrived. He parked the F-250 at the far end, same spot as always, backed in. Old habit. He went inside, hung his jacket on the second hook by the door, and settled onto his stool at the counter. Norma had his coffee waiting. "Morning, Derek." "Morning, Norma." He opened the paper. She put a plate of bacon and eggs in front of him 10 minutes later, without him ordering. He'd been ordering the same thing every Saturday for 11 years. There wasn't much point in asking anymore. The diner was comfortable that morning. The good kind of Saturday comfortable. The sound of forks on plates, low voices, the occasional laugh from the corner booth where 2 older men argued about something that had been settled decades ago and would go on being argued about until one of them couldn't anymore. The brass bell above the door jingled every few minutes as people came and went. The smell of biscuits from the oven in the back. Derek read the sports section first, then the local news. He was halfway through an article about the county road budget when the bell jingled again, and something in the air of the diner shifted. He didn't look up right away. He finished the sentence he was reading. Then he set the paper flat on the counter and lifted his coffee mug. His eyes moved to the door. Wade Greer, off duty. Jeans and boots and that particular way he carried himself. Shoulders back, chin slightly raised, the walk of a man performing confidence for a room he assumed was watching. Lou Satch behind him in full uniform, thumb already hooked in his belt. Derek set the mug down. He kept his eyes on the paper. He turned a page. The bacon on his plate was still warm. He picked up his fork. Stay calm. Let them settle. Don't give them anything to work with. He had learned that lesson in places where the stakes of getting it wrong were considerably higher than a diner on a Saturday morning. 31 years of training had built certain responses into his nervous system, so deep they operated below thought. Read the room, assess, don't escalate. Don't be the reason the situation becomes what someone wants it to become. He heard Wade's voice from the booth, heard the particular pitch of it, loud enough to carry, just controlled enough to seem casual. He heard what Wade said. He turned another page of the newspaper. He could feel Norma watching from behind the counter, could feel the room contracting, the way rooms do when people sense something coming and don't know whether to look or look away. He kept eating. He did not look up when Wade stood. He heard the booth creak, heard the footsteps on the tile, counted them without meaning to. 3, 4, 5. The footsteps stopped. Close. Close enough to smell the cigarette. Hey, I'm talking to you. Derek set his coffee down. folded the newspaper, placed it on the counter. He looked up at Wade. What followed was the conversation Norma would replay in her mind for years afterward. Derek's voice through all of it, level, unhurried, a man who had decided exactly how far he would let this go, and was simply waiting for it to reach that line. It reached the line when Wade grabbed his collar. The stool went over. The plate slid off the counter and shattered on the tile. Derek caught the edge of a table on his way through the door, kept his feet under him through 31 years of muscle memory, and hit the sidewalk on the other side of the threshold. His knee found the concrete first. He stayed down for a moment, not because he had to, because he was choosing what came next, and that choosing required a second of stillness. Inside, he heard Wade laugh. He pressed his palms flat against the sidewalk and pushed himself up. Norma came through the door behind him before he was fully upright. She had a dish towel in her hand and fury in her eyes, and a voice that she was working very hard to keep below a certain volume. "Mitch, are you... Derek, are you okay?" "I'm fine, Norma." "You are not fine." "Norma." His hand on her arm. "Steady. I'm fine. Go back inside." She looked at him. Her jaw was working like she had about 400 words backed up behind her teeth, and no clear path for any of them. "Go back inside," he said again. "Quiet. And make sure you still have that number I gave you." She looked at him for one more second. Then she went back inside. He heard the brass bell jingle behind her. He walked to the truck, opened the door, reached into the glove compartment for a napkin and pressed it against his knee, where the khaki fabric had turned dark. His palms were raw, small beads of blood sitting on the surface of the skin like dew. He wasn't leaving. He was simply giving himself 30 seconds away from Wade's eye line. 30 seconds to let the situation settle into exactly what it was, stripped of performance and heat. He had done this before, in different places, under different circumstances, with considerably higher stakes. You withdraw to assess. You don't withdraw to surrender. There is a difference, and every second of his 31 years knew it. The diner door swung open. The brass bell jingled. Wade walked out with Lou behind him, sunglasses on, thumbs in the belt loops. That walk. Derek knew before Wade opened his mouth what the next 20 minutes were going to look like. He'd seen the shape of it before. Not here, not with these particular people, but the shape was familiar. It had a grammar of its own. He stood at his truck and let it unfold. The ID request, the search, the locked case, the bronze star bouncing off the asphalt. He watched the metal roll under the truck and come to rest against the chassis, and something moved through him that he didn't have a name for. The metal wasn't his. Not really. It had been given to him by a commanding officer who had pressed it into his hands 3 days before that officer died, and Derek had carried it since then because putting it down felt like something he didn't have the right to do. He sat down on the curb. He heard the click of Wade's camera, heard him laugh. He looked at the concrete between his feet and breathed. In the back hallway of Norma's corner kitchen, a phone pressed flat against one ear, Norma Watkins dialed 10 digits she had been carrying for 3 years. It picked up on the second ring. "Ray," she said, "it's Norma Watkins. I run a diner in Clayfield. Derek Colt gave me this number." Her voice dropped. "He's sitting on a curb in my parking lot right now, with his hands bleeding and his medal in the dirt. A man named Wade Greer put him there." A pause. Short. "How long ago?" the voice on the other end asked. 10 minutes. Another pause. Shorter. "I'm coming," General Raymond Stokes said. 4 words. Then the line went quiet. Norma lowered the phone. Through the back window she could see Derek on the curb, still and straight, the way a man sits when he has decided to wait instead of react, when he knows something is already in motion that he doesn't need to push. She went to make him a fresh cup of coffee. The least she could do was make sure he had something warm in his hands. 22 minutes passed. Derek sat on that curb the way he had sat in worse places. Desert outposts where the wait was measured in hours. Hospital corridors in Germany where the wait had no bottom. A concrete curb on a Saturday morning in Kentucky was nothing. He had the coffee Norma had brought him. He had the patience of a man who understood that some things could not be rushed, and that trying only made them worse. Wade had gone back inside, Sitting at the counter now, Derek's stool again, Derek's fresh plate of bacon that Norma had made before everything went sideways. Talking loud and eating with the easy confidence of a man who believed the day was already settled. Lou stood near the cruiser. He'd stopped talking about 15 minutes ago, something in the way Derek had sat down on that curb. No argument, no anger, just a stillness that felt like waiting, rather than resignation, had worked its way under Lou's skin and was sitting there quietly, doing damage he couldn't name. Inside the diner, Angela Pruitt hadn't moved from her table by the window. She was 37 years old, a kindergarten teacher, and she had been sitting in the same chair for the last 20 minutes, with her phone pressed flat against her thigh and the red recording dot blinking. Her hands had stopped shaking about 10 minutes in. She'd made a decision somewhere around the time Wade took the selfie, and once she'd made it, the shaking stopped. She kept the camera on Derek. Then she heard it. Not with her ears first. With something lower, a vibration in the floor, in the window glass, in the fillings of her back teeth. A low, sustained hum that built from nothing into something before she could identify what it was. Other people in the diner felt it too. Forks went still. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Lou turned his head toward the far end of Main Street. 3 black SUVs turned off the highway and came down the center of Main Street at a measured pace. Government plates, tinted windows, the kind of vehicles that didn't announce themselves with sirens because they didn't need to. They moved the way authority moves when it has nothing to prove. They pulled into the lot. The first one stopped 15 feet from where Derek was sitting. The second parked to its left. The third angled in behind the first, blocking the exit. All 3 engines idled for a moment, that low, heavy sound, and then went quiet. Wade had come to the window. He was holding a fork. His mouth was still working on a piece of bacon. His expression had the particular quality of a man who has not yet understood what he is looking at. The door of the lead vehicle opened. A man stepped out. He was in his mid-60s, African-American, built like someone who had stayed in the shape the Army put him in and had never seen a reason to leave it. He wore the full-dress uniform of the United States Army. Dark jacket, gold buttons, the ribbons covering the left side of his chest in dense, layered rows, each one a record of something that had happened in a place most people would never go. His trousers were pressed to a crease you could have used as a straight edge. His shoes caught the morning light. And on each shoulder, 4 silver stars. General Raymond Stokes, Commanding General, United States Army Forces Command. He had driven from Fort Campbell to Clayfield, Kentucky, in 1 hour and 29 minutes. 2 aides stepped out behind him, then a uniformed attorney who moved to the side and was already writing in a small notebook, then a driver who stayed by the vehicle with his hands folded and his eyes forward. General Stokes did not look at the diner, did not look at Wade through the window, did not look at Lou, who had stopped moving entirely and appeared to have forgotten how his legs worked. He walked directly to Derek. Derek saw him coming. He set the coffee mug down on the curb beside him. He pressed his raw palms against his knees, and he pushed himself to his feet, slowly, the same way he'd risen from the sidewalk an hour ago, deliberate, unhurried, a man choosing to stand. General Stokes stopped 3 feet in front of him. The parking lot went absolutely silent. No birds, no traffic. The morning wind had gone still, as if it understood that something was happening that deserved the courtesy of quiet. General Raymond Stokes raised his right hand to his brow. He saluted Derek Colt first. Inside the diner, a woman in the corner booth made a sound that was not quite a word. A man at the far end of the counter put his hand over his mouth. Wade's fork was no longer moving. Let me tell you something about that salute, because if you don't know what it means, you need to. In the United States military, protocol is absolute. The junior rank always salutes first. A private salutes a corporal. A sergeant salutes a lieutenant. A colonel salutes a general. The chain goes all the way up, and it never reverses. Not for convenience, not for sentiment, not for any reason. Except one: the Medal of Honor. The Medal of Honor is the highest military decoration the United States of America can bestow. It is given by the President, in the name of Congress, for acts of valor above and beyond the call of duty. When a Medal of Honor recipient is present, every member of the military, regardless of rank, regardless of stars, salutes them first. Always. A 4-star general salutes first. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs salutes first. The President of the United States salutes first. There is no exception to this rule. There is no rank high enough to reverse it. The Bronze Star that Wade Greer had thrown in the dirt was one of several decorations Derek Colt carried. The Medal of Honor itself was in a display case in a building in Washington, D.C., where it had been placed after the ceremony in which the President of the United States had hung it around Derek's neck with both hands. Derek Colt straightened the collar of his torn flannel shirt. He lifted his chin. He raised his right hand to his brow and returned the salute. Clean, precise, like the 31 years had never left his bones and had no intention of doing so. Stokes dropped his hand, stepped forward, took Derek's right hand in both of his. Sergeant Major Colt. His voice was low, not for privacy, just the voice of a man who had never needed volume to be heard. I got the call. I was on the road in 8 minutes. Appreciate you coming, Ray. Wasn't a question of whether. What's your knee doing? It's fine. Stokes looked at him for a moment with the particular expression of a man who knows when another man is understating an injury and has chosen his battle. We'll get someone to look at it. He looked at Derek's torn flannel shirt, the shoulder seam, the blood on the khakis. Then he looked at the dark blue F-250 at the far end of the lot, and at the jacket hanging visible through the driver's window. Dark leather, the Iron Cross chapter patch on the back facing outward, the way Derek always left it when he wasn't wearing it. Stokes had known Derek Colt for 23 years. He had never needed a patch or a rank insignia to know who he was looking at. But he understood, in that moment, exactly what Wade Greer had decided when he walked into that diner and saw a man without a uniform. He had decided the man didn't count. That was the only mistake that mattered. Everything else had followed from it. Inside the diner, 12 people who had not moved or spoken for the last 40 minutes were now pressed against the window glass. Angela Pruitt had shifted her phone from her thigh to the window, the red dot still blinking, catching all of it. Wade Greer stood at the counter. The fork had fallen from his hand somewhere in the last 60 seconds. He didn't remember it happening. His face had gone a color that had nothing to do with the sun. A pale, flat white, the kind that comes when the blood in your head makes a unilateral decision to be somewhere else. General Stokes turned around. He looked at the diner. He looked at the parking lot. He looked at Lou Satch, who was standing near his cruiser, with his hand no longer anywhere near his belt, and his body language communicating something close to a complete structural collapse. You. Stokes walked toward Lou at a measured pace. Not fast, not slow. The pace of a man with nowhere more important to be. Come here. Lou came. Or tried to. His boots dragged on the asphalt like they'd picked up weight since the morning started. He stopped 5 feet from the general, and could not bring himself to make eye contact. Are you aware, Stokes said, that you conducted an illegal search of this man's vehicle? No warrant, no probable cause, no consent. Lou's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Are you aware that you detained this man without charge? A man who has committed no crime. A man who served this country for 31 years. A pause. A man who received the Medal of Honor from the President of the United States. Lou's bottom lip moved. Sir, Wade said. I didn't ask what Wade said. I didn't ask what Wade said. Stokes's voice hadn't changed in volume or temperature. It didn't need to. I asked what you did. Stokes's attorney was already on the phone. 3 calls in the space of 2 minutes. The county sheriff's department, the state attorney general's office, a contact at the Department of Justice. He spoke quietly and moved his pen across his notebook without stopping. Then General Stokes turned toward the diner door. Wade Greer came out. He didn't strut this time. Didn't hook his thumbs in his belt loops. He came through that door the way a man walks when every instinct in his body is telling him to go back, and he's coming out anyway, because there's no other option, and he knows it. Sir, his voice had changed, higher than before, something stripped out of it. I think there's been a misunderstanding here. I didn't know. Stokes cut him off. Not with a shout, with a silence that lasted exactly 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds, Wade Greer heard every word he was about to say fall apart before he could say it. You didn't know what? Stokes said. You didn't know he was a veteran? You didn't know he had a Medal of Honor? He took one step toward Wade, still calm, completely calm, in the way that certain things are calm. Deep water, high voltage, the moment before a verdict. Let me ask you something. If he didn't have that medal, if he was just a 62-year-old man eating breakfast on a Saturday morning, would what you did have been acceptable then? Wade's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Nothing came. That's what I thought, Stokes said. Norma stepped into the doorway behind Wade, arms crossed, eyes red but her voice level and certain. General, I've got security camera footage, every second from the moment they walked in to the moment you pulled up. Audio included. Angela Pruitt raised her phone from the window, the red dot still blinking. I've got it too, all of it. Stokes looked at both of them. Hold on to it, he said. Both of you, you're going to need it. He looked back at Wade. Wade was looking at the ground. His shoulders had come down from where they'd been all morning. Everything about his posture had changed. The weight distribution, the set of his jaw, even the way his hands were hanging at his sides, loose and without purpose, like they'd forgotten what they were for. For the first time that morning, Wade Greer was standing in a room where he could feel the walls. He just didn't know yet how close they were. 15 minutes later, a county sheriff's cruiser pulled into the lot. Not Clayfield PD. County. This was already outside Donald Greer's reach, and everyone in that parking lot knew it. 2 deputies stepped out. They walked straight to Wade. Wade Greer, you're under arrest. The deputy's voice was flat and professional. Assault in the 4th degree. Unlawful detention. Destruction of federal property. Deprivation of civil rights under color of law. Wade's head came up. Theft? What destruction? The medal you threw on the ground, sir. That is a federally recognized decoration. You damaged and discarded it intentionally in front of witnesses and 2 security cameras. They turned him around. The handcuffs clicked. That sound, 2 small mechanical clicks in a quiet parking lot on a Saturday morning, carried further than it should have. Angela Pruitt's phone caught it. The security camera above Norma's back door caught it. 12 people standing at the window of Norma's corner kitchen heard it, and would remember it for years. The way you remember the specific sound of something that has finally, after a long time, come to an end. Lou Satch was placed on immediate administrative leave. His badge was taken on the spot. His service weapon was taken. His body camera, it turned out, had not been activated during the entire incident. Nobody in that parking lot expressed surprise at this information. It didn't matter. Norma's camera had everything. Angela's phone had everything. Every word, every shove, every laugh, the selfie, the bronze star rolling across the asphalt. Wade sat in the back of the county cruiser. He had his phone in his cuffed hands. They'd let him keep it, which they would later realize was a mistake, and he was calling his father. Dad! Dad! You need to come get me! They're arresting me! This is... Call someone. Donald Greer made calls. He called the county sheriff. Voicemail. He called the district attorney's office. Voicemail. He called a judge he'd known for 11 years. A man who owed him something from a favor nobody talked about. Voicemail. He sat in his office with the phone in his hand and listened to the silence on the other end of every number he dialed. The calls he'd been able to make for 16 years had stopped working in the space of a single Saturday morning. The political math had shifted in real time. Nobody wanted their name in the same sentence as this story. Not now. Not with a 4-star general in the parking lot and a video already spreading to phones across 3 counties. Nobody picked up. Not one person. Back in the parking lot, Derek Colt knelt beside his truck. He reached under the chassis and found the bronze star. He picked it up, brushed the grit off with his thumb, slow and careful, the way you handle something that belongs to someone who can no longer hold it themselves. He looked at it for a moment. Then he placed it back on the dark green velvet, back in the case, and closed the lid. He shook Stokes's hand one more time. Thank you, Ray. Anytime, Sergeant Major. You know that. He nodded at Norma. She was standing in the doorway with her arms crossed and her eyes bright. He got in his truck. He drove home. No speech. No fist in the air. No moment of standing in the parking lot receiving the acknowledgement of the people who'd watched through the window and done nothing. Just a man in a dark blue F-250 pulling out of a lot on a Saturday morning, the same way he'd been pulling out of that lot every Saturday for 11 years, except for the torn shirt and the dried blood on his palms, and the case on the back seat that he'd need to repair the latch on before he could lock it again. Carol was in the garden when he got home. She had her gloves on and dirt on her knees, and she straightened up when she heard the truck pull in. She looked at him. She looked at his knee, at his hands, at the shoulder seam of his shirt. She took her gloves off. She went inside without saying anything. He heard the kitchen faucet, the rattle of the first aid kit under the sink. He sat down in the chair on the back porch and waited. She came out with a bowl of warm water and a cloth, and she cleaned his palms without speaking. He let her. That was the whole conversation. Some conversations don't need words to be complete. The video hit the internet before Wade's mugshot was taken. Angela Pruitt, 37 years old, kindergarten teacher, mother of 2, posted the footage on every platform she had. No filter, no edit, no commentary. 5 words as a caption. This happened in Clayfield today. By Saturday night, it had 340,000 views. By Sunday morning, 1.1 million. By Monday afternoon, 4 million and climbing. The headline that spread fastest: Police Chief's son assaults Medal of Honor recipient, Clayfield, Kentucky. The comment sections ran for days. Veterans who recognized what the salute meant before the video explained it. People who'd never heard of Clayfield and never would, who felt the concrete under Derek's knees like it was their own. Parents who called their fathers after watching it. Children who showed it to their grandparents and sat with them while they watched. Veterans organizations issued formal statements within 48 hours. Every statement said a version of the same thing. This man served. This is what happened to him on a Saturday morning. The Kentucky State Attorney General opened a formal investigation the following Wednesday. Her office requested every complaint filed against Wade Greer in the previous 6 years. There were 9 complaints, 2 involving physical altercations. All 9 complainants were black residents of Clayfield. All 9 complaints had been filed with the Clayfield Police Department. All 9 had disappeared. No investigation, no follow-up, no paper trail. The moment they reached Donald Greer's desk. One complaint was from a 22-year-old college student pulled over for a broken taillight. Wade had made him lie face down on the wet road for 35 minutes in November. The student had filed a report. Nothing happened. Another was from a 53-year-old school librarian named Diane Pruitt. Wade had appeared at her door at 10:45 on a Tuesday night over a noise complaint from a neighbor. The street was silent. Her house was silent. She'd been reading. He walked through her living room without permission, opened her hall closet, looked through her kitchen, and left without explanation. She'd filed a report the next morning. Nothing happened. At the trial, Diane Pruitt took the stand. She was a small woman with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the particular stillness of someone who has been waiting a long time for a room to be ready to hear her. She described that Tuesday night in 11 sentences. Flat, exact. The way people speak when they've rehearsed something so many times, it has become simply true. When the prosecutor asked how she felt when the complaint disappeared, she looked at the jury and said, "I felt like I had imagined it, like it hadn't happened. That was worse than what he did at the door." The courtroom was quiet for a long time after that. The investigation expanded. Internal affairs went into the Clayfield PD with authority and subpoenas, and the kind of patience that comes from having everything on camera before you start asking questions. What they found was a department built around one man's ability to make inconvenient things disappear. Racial profiling numbers that had never been reported to the state, use of force incidents logged as resolved with no documentation, and 16 years of a chief who had confused protecting his department with protecting his son. Donald Greer resigned on a Thursday morning. He was indicted the following Tuesday. His 16-year career ended the same way his son's freedom had ended, with a mugshot taken in the booking room at the county facility on Route 9, 2 miles from the church where he'd shaken hands every Sunday for a decade and a half. The trial began 8 weeks after the incident. Wade sat at the defense table in a suit that looked like someone else had bought it for someone else. His attorney used the word regret 11 times in the closing statement. The jury deliberated for 2 hours and 50 minutes. Guilty on all counts. The judge, a woman named Patricia Hollis, 24 years on the bench, sentenced Wade Greer to 3 years in a federal correctional facility. No parole for the first 18 months. Wade stood when the sentence was read. He stood very still, the way people stand when they are trying not to let their legs do what they want to do. His mother was in the gallery. She put her hand over her mouth. His father was not there. Donald Greer had been advised by his own attorney not to appear. He was waiting for his own trial date, which the state attorney general's office had already scheduled and had declined to delay. Lou Satch took a plea agreement. 12 months, minimum security, permanent revocation of his law enforcement certification. He would not carry a badge again. He understood this. He had understood it, he would later say, from the moment he opened the door of Derek's truck without consent, and heard Derek state for the record that he did not consent, and he'd done it anyway. He'd had time to think about that moment. He'd had a lot of time. The civil suit came after. A civil rights attorney out of Louisville, 23 years of practice, the kind of record that made opposing counsel check the docket twice before deciding whether to fight, represented Derek. The suit named Wade Greer, Lou Satch, the Clayfield Police Department, and the county. The jury awarded Derek Colt $2,400,000 in damages. Derek donated a significant portion of it to a veterans support organization in eastern Kentucky that had been operating out of a converted church basement for 11 years, without enough resources to do what it needed to do. He didn't hold a press conference to announce this. He told 2 people. Carol knew, because Carol knew everything. Norma knew, because Norma was the one who'd handed him the coffee while he sat on the curb, and some things create a bond that functions like information even when no words are exchanged. The Clayfield Police Department now operates under a federal consent decree, mandatory bias training, a civilian oversight board, body cameras that cannot be deactivated during any interaction with the public, every complaint logged, tracked, and reviewed by an independent monitor. It isn't perfect. No system built by people ever is, but it isn't what it was. And in the courtroom, on the last day of the trial, before the bailiff let him out, Wade Greer stood at the defense table and looked across the room to where Derek Colt was sitting in a dark suit with his hands folded in his lap. For 11 seconds, Angela Pruitt counted, because she was there, because she had been there for all of it. Wade looked at Derek without looking away. He didn't say anything. There wasn't language for what those 11 seconds contained. But something moved across his face during them that hadn't been there on the Saturday morning when he'd walked into Norma's corner kitchen with his sunglasses pushed up on his head and his thumbs in his belt loops, and the absolute certainty of a man who has never once been asked to account for what he does. It wasn't remorse exactly. It was something earlier than remorse, something that had to come before it could arrive. Recognition. The recognition that the man across the room had never been what Wade had decided he was on site, had never been a problem to be managed, a presence to be challenged, a test of authority to be passed. Had been, the entire time, on that stool, on that sidewalk, on that curb with bleeding hands and a medal in the dirt, exactly who he was. And that Wade had known that, somewhere underneath everything, from the first moment he walked through Norma's door. He just hadn't let himself know it. The bailiff touched his arm. Wade turned away. The door closed behind him. Derek and Carol still go to Norma's every Saturday. Same time, same stool, same coffee, black, no sugar, the ceramic mug with the chip on the rim that Norma has replaced twice now, always with a mug that has a chip in approximately the same place, because some things are worth preserving even when they're impractical. Norma still has his coffee poured before he reaches the counter. Morning, Derek. Morning, Norma. The jacket got fixed. Carol took it to a seamstress on Birch Street the Monday after everything happened. The woman didn't charge her. She said she'd seen the video. Said it was the least she could do. Derek wears it every Saturday. Same hook by the door. Second one from the left. The diner looks a little different now. Norma added 4 tables to the side room she'd been using for storage, and a window that looks out onto the alley, where she keeps her herb garden in the summer. Business doubled in the 6 months after the story broke. People drive in from 2 counties over, just to eat at the place they saw on the news. They don't make a fuss about it. They just come in and eat breakfast, and sometimes they look at the photograph on the wall next to the register and don't say anything. Norma took that photograph herself. Derek and General Stokes, shaking hands in the parking lot on the morning it all happened. She had it printed on matte paper and put it in a dark wooden frame. Nobody asks about it. Everybody knows. And next to the front door, just below the brass bell, there is a small bronze plaque. 4 words. Everyone is welcome here. General Stokes visits once a year, always in the fall. He drives down from Fort Campbell in his personal vehicle. No convoy, no aides, no stars on his shoulders. Just a man in civilian clothes visiting another man he has known since a desert they have never needed to name out loud. They take the booth by the window. Norma brings them 2 plates of bacon, eggs, and biscuits without being asked. Coffee. No menus needed. They don't talk about that Saturday. They talk about Stokes's granddaughter who just started her 2nd year at the University of Kentucky. They talk about Derek's tomato garden and whether the deer fence is finally working. They argue about fishing. Stokes thinks the Cumberland River is better. Derek will not hear it. They never agree. They never stop arguing. When Stokes leaves, they shake hands in the parking lot. Same spot where the salute happened. Neither of them mentions it. They don't have to. There is something people get wrong about moments like that Saturday morning. They remember the video. They remember the general, and the uniform, and the 4 stars and the salute, that nobody in that diner had the vocabulary to process when they first saw it. They remember Wade's face going white. They remember the click of the handcuffs. What they sometimes miss is the part that came before all of it. A 62-year-old man, sitting on a concrete curb with his palms scraped raw and his medal in the dirt under a truck, doing nothing, not calling for help, not performing his own suffering, not waiting to be seen, just sitting, breathing, holding his dignity the same way he'd held it through 31 years of things most people will never be asked to hold. The general and the salute and the 3 black SUVs, none of that gave Derek Colt his dignity back. He never lost it. He was sitting on that curb with it intact, in the middle of everything Wade Greer had tried to strip away, and it was still there. That is the part that matters. That is the part that stays. You cannot take something from a man who has decided it is not available to be taken. If this story stayed with you, think about why, and think about who in your life right now might be sitting on a curb that nobody else can see. This is Heart Tales. Thank you for being here.